Channel open. Welcome back to WeeklyTrek, a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on April 4th, 2020, and is current through Star Trek Picard Season 1, so beware of spoilers. All right, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
WeeklyTrek is a 30-minute news show covering the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise. We are in a new golden age of Star Trek. There are 5 television shows in production, possibly more on the way, and enough merchandise to fill the Bajoran wormhole. So stick with me, and I'll help you sort the real facts from a lot of the Dominion propaganda that you'll find online. But I can't do this alone, and my guest this week is returning guest and host of the new Promenade Merchants podcast, Heather Kirby. Heather, welcome back to WeeklyTrek.
Thank you so much for once again having me on WeeklyTrek. I enjoy coming and talking with you about the news of the week, and I'm excited.
All right, Heather, well, you know the drill. I want to know something that's got you feeling excited about Star Trek at the moment. What's got you moving at Warp 10?
I think the thing that has me the most excited right now is just the sense of community amongst the Star Trek fandom and the actors and the other fans, and just like right now when everybody's stuck inside, they're stuck at home, they're stuck quarantining and social distancing from people, the online community is more important than ever. And we've seen examples over the past few weeks of not just fans reaching out to other fans and like holding group Skype calls or group Zoom chats, things like that. I held one myself a couple weeks ago. It was amazing. I got to meet a couple people I had never even talked to very much before. And we had the 2-hour-long conversation about Star Trek and our lives. And not only just other fans interacting with each other like that, but watching the Star Trek actors do the same thing. When Marina Sirtis shared that group picture of all the TNG cast Skyping together for her birthday. I mean, that can't help but just make you feel warm and fuzzy inside, you know, and then how much we long to connect with each other even when we can't do it in person.
I love that picture of Marina. I guess it was taken by LeVar, but it was Marina's birthday, and in lieu of having a birthday party, because no one's having birthday parties at the moment, she held one it was like a group Zoom call, and it was the whole cast of The Next Generation minus Denise Crosby, but everybody who served more than one season on the main cast of The Next Generation, including Will Wheaton, was there. And it's this fabulous picture. It's one of those funny things. It's sort of a Star Trek-like technology now being used in 2020 to help facilitate a lot of people who need, you know, to continue doing their work. We're all doing our jobs or our social lives either through video call or through some kind of virtual platform. And so it's a funny coincidence that the cast of Star Trek The Next Generation, which sort of brought video calling into the public consciousness, are now having to use video calling in order to get together.
Very true.
Well, the thing I'm feeling good about Star Trek this week is a book that I read. I have more time to read books now that I don't go outside anymore. And I read this month's most recent Star Trek novel release, The Higher Frontier by Christopher L. Bennett. This one has sort of slid under the radar a little bit because of everything going on. It's actually a really enjoyable book. It's set at the very end of the quote-unquote motion picture era. So supposedly in the Star Trek timeline, there was a 5-year mission that Kirk went on after the motion picture, before the events of the Wrath of Khan, as captain of the Enterprise on this new 5-year mission. So this book is set right at the end of that second 5-year mission and sort of takes you through the transition of everybody being on the Enterprise, finishing their adventures again, into where you find the crew at the beginning of the Wrath of Khan, where Kirk is commandant of Starfleet Academy and Spock is captain of the Enterprise, but it's sort of an academy training ship. It's actually it's a really good book. Christopher L. Bennett does a really good job of sort of plugging holes in the canon. He's done this in all of his sort of books before. This one has the Aena, it has Medusans, it has Andorians. There's lots of sort of setup for the Wrath of Khan, explanations for why things end up the way they are, filling in the gaps between the motion picture of Wrath of Khan. It's a really, really good novel. It's a lot of fun, and it's a very easy read. So that's what I'm feeling good about Star Trek this week. and I recommend you pick it up.
Well, that definitely sounds like a lot of fun, and I think I'm going to look into that because I've been looking for more books to read.
All right. Well, with that, let's turn to the week's top stories.
There's a war going on, and I'm a reporter.
So our first story this week is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on Star Trek. We have talked in recent weeks about some of the impact of social distancing, self-isolation, quarantines, lockdowns, stay-at-home orders, etc. on a number of fan events. WonderCon Anaheim was cancelled. Destination Star Trek Germany has been postponed until the fall. We are still waiting for word on San Diego Comic-Con and Star Trek Las Vegas, but we haven't talked so much about what the impact of the pandemic is on the ongoing Star Trek productions. We know Star Trek Picard Season 1 was not impacted because it is finished, but what about Star Trek Discovery Season 3 and Star Trek Lower Decks Season 1? Well, the news is mixed to not good, as we have found out this week. I think for those fans who are hoping for a very quick turnaround from Picard to Discovery Season 3, the pandemic may have thrown a wrench in everybody's plans, and we might be waiting a bit longer than we had anticipated. So here's what we know about Star Trek Discovery Season 3 and about Lower Decks Season 1. Discovery Season 3 first. So post-production work on Discovery Season 3 is proceeding. So Scott Gamzon, who's the editor for Star Trek Discovery, has been over the first 3 seasons of the show, tweeted just this week he had finished editing cuts of 12 out of the 13 episodes of Season 3. So he just has one more episode left to edit. So that's in the positive camp. Anthony Rapp, in comments on an Instagram video that Wilson Cruz was doing, also indicated that visual effects work was continuing, but had been moved to everybody working from home. And so while it was continuing, it would likely slow down the effects work for the season overall. So that's in the medium column. Unfortunately, here's where the bad news starts spinning up. Jeff Russo, the composer for the score for Star Trek Discovery, did an interview this week with Trek Movie, and they asked him about Star Trek Discovery Season 3, and he indicated that he was in the process right now of writing the score for the first 5 episodes of Discovery, and putting the music on the episode in addition to filling in the last few visual effects is like one of the very last things that happens on an episode. So it says that they're really close to the end of getting episodes 1 through 5 ready, but, and it's a big but, until the orchestra that records the music for Star Trek Discovery can get together and record in one room the music that Jeff Russo is composing right now, there will be no episodes of Star Trek Discovery Season 3, which means that we're almost certainly not going to get Discovery until after they start to ease up some of the restrictions in the Los Angeles area and allow people to go back to work. Just moving everything from home is not going to net us Star Trek Discovery Season 3, because until you can get all those musicians in the same room together, I mean, it's not like I saw people, sort of commenting online, well, couldn't they just record all the musicians separately and edit them all together? No, that's not how making good music works. They do multiple takes and you have to hear it all together. And then the composer says, do it again, but do it a little more this way or do it a little more that way. It is a collaborative, interactive process that takes being in the same room. And so I think we are almost certainly not going to get Discovery Season 3 for at least the next couple of months. Folks have also been asking, okay, well, does that mean if Discovery's pushed out a little bit further, does that mean Lower Decks is next up on deck? And maybe. So Mike McMahon has said that they have transitioned to working from home, same as everybody else in the country has. And that so far, this was as of about 10 days ago when he tweeted this, transitioning to work from home had not impacted the date on which they were scheduled to finish the show and have it ready for broadcast, though he did say that could change tomorrow, could change next week. The only issue is I kind of think Lower Decks is going to face ultimately the same bottleneck that Discovery does, which is if these stay-at-home orders persist long enough, they're not going to be able to record the score for Lower Decks too. And so you have exactly the same problem of a show that is otherwise finished without this last little bit that needs to go in. So it's not great news for us getting new Star Trek soon, but obviously much better that everybody be safe and abide by government recommendations about what they should do. And I'm looking forward to getting both of these shows when we get them, but it seems like, we're all in this together, and how Southern California fares through this pandemic is likely also to be be a contributing factor to the question of when will we get our next Star Trek show? Heather, what's your reaction?
I mean, you know that I have been in the camp of really excited about Star Trek Discovery Season 3 in particular and wanting to have it out there. But I've come to the realization over the past couple of weeks that this is for the best. And it's a better prognosis than a lot of the other television right now because there's so many other TV shows who were stopped mid-production. There's so many other shows who had to delay their production. And at least we know that Season 3 of Discovery has been filmed and that they're in post-production. And so when things start to lighten up in Southern California and they can do these smaller things that they need to do to get done to put the finishing touches on it, there will be a faster turnaround to get it out there. I also think that in terms of like their production schedule in general, that this delay is actually going to end up helping them because I forget when exactly it was that our fearless leader of Star Trek Discovery, Sonequa Martin Green, announced that she was expecting another child, which is wonderful and awesome, but that's also something that would have to delay producing season 4 of Discovery, depending on how far along she is and where she would feel comfortable filming, especially a lot of the action scenes that come with filming a sci-fi and action show like Star Trek. So I think the fact that season 3 is going to be put behind is ultimately a good thing. And we are here and ready for it whenever the time happens for it to come out there.
That's an excellent point to put things in perspective, which is that we are going to get 13 episodes of Star Trek Discovery Season 3. They finished filming about 6 weeks before things started getting bad in the US. So the season is done. It's just a question of finishing it up and getting it out there, which is more than can be said for a bunch of other shows, where, as you said, they had to stop production mid-season. And I think the expectation is that's it for those seasons now. They are done until they come back for next season or not at all. So, we know we're still getting 13 episodes of Star Trek Discovery Season 3. We know we're still getting 10 episodes of Lower Decks Season 1. They're all still coming. Just might be a longer wait than we thought. But the nice thing is, this is a Star Trek franchise. There are nearly 800 hours of other episodes for us to watch, including the 10 episodes of Star Trek Picard Season 1, which just wrapped, because why not go back and rewatch that a bunch of times, right?
Yes.
Which is a good segue into our next two stories, which are done looking forward and now turning our attention back to the rearview mirror to talk a little bit about Star Trek Picard Season 1 and some of the press coverage that there was coming out of the finale. And so our first story in that vein is an interview with Brent Spiner. He conducted this interview with TV Guide about Data's appearance in Picard Season 1. He was talking about Data's second exit from the Star Trek franchise, the first obviously being in Star Trek Nemesis. He says of Data's exit in Arcadia Ego Part 2, I thought it was pretty great. It was an unbelievably beautifully written scene. Michael Chabon at his finest. Both Patrick and I were like, this is fantastic, and we were both really moved by it. It was just wonderfully written, and I think the intent was to soften the blow of Nemesis and give Data a gentler exit than he had in that film. He talked about how he enjoyed playing another of Data's relatives, and did also say that he would be interested in returning to play Soong again, but he would not be interested in returning to play Data again. Spiner says, I wouldn't really entertain the idea of doing it again because I just don't think it would be realistic, referring in this case to his age. So it seemed right to me to give him this more gentle send-off, and it seemed right to me in the context of the entire season of Picard and what Picard himself had been experiencing because of the loss of Data. I think it allows him to feel okay about it too, so it seemed like the right thing to do. So it sounds like from everything Brent is saying, in Arcadia Ego Part 2 is the definitive last time that we will see Brent Spiner playing Data. But given everything we've gotten over 7 years of the Next Generation, the 4 Next Generation movies, and now his appearances in Star Trek Picard Season 1, that's a lot of Data. Heather, how's it got you feeling?
I think it's very fitting. It was a very fitting end to Data in that episode. It tugged at my heartstrings, definitely. And that whole scene between them, just the talk about mortality and what it really means, it was really, it ended up being very timely for the world as we live in right now too. So I mean, it was a perfect ending all around. I'm very glad he came back for season 1 of Picard, because I knew he had a lot of reservations about wanting to play Data again because of his age. And I think that's fair. As much as there's so much different effects and makeup can do, Brent is ultimately the one that has to play the character. And if he doesn't feel comfortable playing an android who doesn't age as he continues to age, then that's his prerogative as an actor. That's not anything anyone should judge him on. So I think Data's end was very fitting, and it was absolutely lovely and beautiful. And hopefully, as the legend of so many actors who have played multiple roles in the Star Trek franchise, will still get to see Brent Spiner again, just not as Data.
And I think, we had sort of gotten to the point where this really was the last appearance that there could have been of Data. I mean, he's now technically died twice, which is one more time than most people get. But also, they did a great job with making Spiner look much more like sort of Data of 2 decades ago, but it really only worked in very limited context. I mean, it's not like you could have resurrected Data and had him back on the show and sort of wandering around. Actually, in one of the interviews with Michael Chabon that there was after the finale, he was talking about how Brent had sort of laid down the gauntlet to tell them, I'm happy to reprise my role, but only so long as you do not unkill Data, right? You don't bring him back to life. And I think given those constraints, they certainly did, in my opinion, a pretty fabulous job of giving that character what Brent described as a gentler exit than he had gotten in Nemesis. Well, we were just talking about Michael Chabon, and so we will transition to a roundup article that TrekCore did of various different Michael Chabon interviews in the wake of the Star Trek Picard season finale. He talked to The Hollywood Reporter, he talked to Variety, he talked to IGN about the show and about his experiences making it and about interpreting the finale. And TrekCore did a great job of picking out the most important things you need to know from all of those different interviews so you don't have to wade your way through all of them yourself. So I just picked out a few different details from each of the interviews. So he went into a bit of detail about the decision to kill and then resurrect Jean-Luc Picard. He says, it was the plan from early on. At some point, we probably talked about 25 different ways to end it. There was a moment where we had a conversation, Akiva Goldsman, Kirsten Beyer, and I, and we went to talk to Alex Kurtzman. We had this realization that if we want to put our money where our mouth has been all season, if we're saying that since synthetic life forms are real and legitimate and they have their sentience and they have the right to life and existence, if we're going to be putting Picard out there where he's going to stand up and be willing to sacrifice his own life to prove that point, then he needs to prove it with his life. Another area that has sparked a ton of conversation since the season finale, and we got a lot more context behind, was that moment right from the very end of the episode where you see Seven and Raffi sharing a potentially romantic moment between the two of them. And Chabon indicated that actually that moment was not scripted. That was something that had been developed by the actors as part of rehearsing that scene, but it was something that everybody decided worked and they wanted to keep, and he did indicate it was something that they planned to explore in more depth in season 2, which, as we have said before, Michael Chabon will not be the showrunner for season 2, but he does remain an executive producer. He is writing 2 episodes of season 2. This is not a Brian Fuller scenario where once he's out and he's not coming back, even though he is moving as showrunner over to making his own show for Showtime based on his novel Cavalier and Clay. He is still remaining an executive producer on Picard and will be active in the room, as you can tell, because he's writing 2 episodes. So on season 2, he says season 2 is going to be different in some ways. It's definitely going to go in directions that we didn't see in season 1. I think we've been emboldened in many ways by the popularity of the show. I've only done this once, but I would imagine it's probably true for a lot of television shows, especially in this era. Season 1 was, in many respects, about learning how to make Star Trek Picard, both in a production sense, but also in terms of storytelling and who our cast is, how these characters end up forming surprising links and attachments to each other. It's in a way that I think was probably true back with TNG and what I was talking about. Everyone agrees once Riker grew the beard, the show got better. It was because they learned what they had. Going forward, we're only going to be doing more of what we did with greater confidence and with greater sense of what this show feels like when it's firing on all engines. Well, that is a very exciting, if not entirely cryptic description description of what season 2 will be about. Heather, how do you feel about the finale for Star Trek Picard season 1, and how are you feeling about season 2?
I'm excited. I'm really excited. I personally love the finale of season 1. I think it really brought all the different threads that they had going on and all the different stories, and it really brought it together in a very cohesive and logical way, and it just made me feel really good watching it. And you know, there was so much to unpack from that article, because Michael Chabon is such a gift to the Star Trek universe. I mean, he has been so open talking with fans on a weekly basis on his Instagram and asking questions. And he honestly, he doesn't need to do all that, but he is. And there's so many people who take that for granted. I mean, to literally be able to ask a showrunner of your show questions like this and get such detailed and thoughtful answers. Like he's a fan himself, which was one of the different bits of the article he mentioned about how he's just a fan of Star Trek himself, and he has so much respect for what he was writing and the characters he was dealing with. He's a gift that sometimes I wonder if this fandom truly deserves it. The whole issue with Picard being in a synthetic body at the end made a lot of sense to me. They stated from the beginning of the series that his brain abnormality was going to be an issue, and it came up a couple of other times. So you figured there was going to have to be some sort of solution to solve that, because the show is called Star Trek Picard. As much as, like, people have argued that they wanted Picard's death to have more meaning, and bringing him back as a synthetic didn't really solve that. I don't think we could have had a season 2 without Jean-Luc Picard, in my opinion, because that's the name of the show. So I think him being in a synthetic body does really give light to everything that he was trying to do throughout the season, and show that synthetics are real people too. So they were putting their money where their mouth is, and making Picard a synthetic really does that. The other issue that you brought up between that tiniest little scene between Seven and Raffi, I loved it personally. I am the biggest supporter of 7 of 9 being bisexual, just because it's something that really mirrors my own journey and something I can really relate to. 7, it's completely understandable that a person like 7, who had spent most of her childhood and a large part of her adulthood as a part of the Borg, would take the time to really discover herself and discover her own sexuality and her own feelings about relationships. And so as much as that little, I love it, little detail that scene wasn't planned, is something that both Michelle and Jerry thought that their characters had a connection. And so they made that happen. And I look forward to seeing where they go with that. And yeah, just looking into season 2 as a whole, even though Chabon's not going to be the showrunner, he still has left his impact on the show, and he's still going to continue to do so. And I think season 2 is going to be a lot like season 2 of Discovery. It's going to have, as much as people complained about the darkness of season 1 and a lot of the dark issues of Picard, I think season 2 is going to bring a little bit more of a sunnier and hopeful side, and you're going to see the Star Trek that you recognize and know and love more, a lot in the same ways that Discovery did in season 2. So I'm looking forward to all of it.
We'll probably all continue to marinate on Picard season 1 for a while, and it seems like we won't have too much else to marinate on for a bit. So I think giving it some time to breathe and for people to spend some more time with it and watch it all the way through from beginning to end, I think probably the way it's most likely supposed to be viewed. I mean, I really liked the season as a whole. I had some issues with some episodes, but overall came away feeling very good about it. But we will see what the future holds. Well, our last story for this week is an interview with Jeff Russo and an announcement. Lakeshore Records, who do the soundtracks for Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard, really like to both announce and release Star Trek soundtracks between WeeklyTrek episodes, and that's exactly the same thing that has happened this time. The full Star Trek Picard Season 1 soundtrack is now available. It includes all of the tracks that were included on the Chapter 1 set that came out about a month ago, as well as 27 new tracks that include music from the back 5 episodes of the season, and also includes the stunningly wonderful cover of Blue Sky sung by Isa Briones. Now, it is a little weird because they put out Chapter 1, and then 6 weeks later, they put out the full season soundtrack that had all of the same tracks as Chapter 1, plus, I guess, what would have been Chapter 2. And Lakeshore Records do recognize that that's a little odd. And so if you feel cheated about having bought Chapter 1 when the full soundtrack had everything, you can reach out to Lakeshore Records before April the 17th with proof of purchase of Chapter 1, and they will send you a download code for the remaining tracks so you can get those free of charge as if you had just waited and purchased the full soundtrack at the end of the season. If you want more details about how to take advantage of that, head over to trekcore.com. They have the details there, or head over to Lakeshore Records' website or social media for more information. But that's it for Star Trek Picard. But there was this interview with Jeff Russo that was on the website Flickering Myth. And in it, they actually got into talking a little bit about this supposed Noah Hawley Star Trek movie. So Jeff Russo, as you may know, is a frequent collaborator with Noah Hawley, the creator of TV shows like Legion and Fargo. Jeff Russo did the score for Legion and has done Noah Hawley's first movie. And the interviewer asked Jeff about if he had talked to Noah Hawley at all about his upcoming Star Trek movie, which, while it has not been formally announced, has been sort of talked about enough in both the trade press and was cryptically referenced by the Viacom CBS CEO as being in development. So everybody just sort of assumes that as of right now, that is the Star Trek movie project du jour. And Jeff indicates that he will be the person who will score that movie as well. He said, we have spoken about it and we've talked about what he is going to want from a musical perspective and how to approach it and what the story is looking like. It's going to be, which is extremely exciting to me, but it was not by design. All of that was purely by coincidence that I happened to be doing Star Trek, but also happened to be a frequent collaborator of the next Star Trek director. He's also a fan and a good friend of mine, so when I started working on Star Trek, we chatted about it, talked about it, had conversations about the storytelling and the music and the themes and stuff. He's one to definitely talk about music with me, so when he called to say that his film was in the works, I was extremely excited. Unfortunately, Jeff didn't take the bait of the interviewer of telling us any more about what Noah Hawley has planned for his Star Trek movie, but it sounds like Noah Hawley has thought enough about this movie that he has a good sense of who he wants his composer to be, which implies that maybe there has been more going on behind the scenes than we have been privy to, which I'm sure is the case. But Heather, how would you feel about a Noah Hawley directed, Jeff Russo scored Star Trek movie?
You know, I feel like every time I'm on WeeklyTrek, we end up talking about some sort of Star Trek movie news. I mentioned the last time I love the idea of a Noah Hawley movie, and the fact that Jeff Russo is going to score it, I think would be even phenomenal. Even better than just the idea of Noah Hawley directing it. Noah Hawley uses music a lot to help tell his stories, and Jeff Russo has proven throughout 2 seasons of Discovery and 1 season of Picard that he is really top of his game when it comes to taking cues throughout the Star Trek universe and using that to help tell the stories through his music. I'm personally, I have never bought a pure soundtrack score before I bought Chapter 1 of Picard, and now I'm going to have to go find that download code to get the other half of the soundtrack, because as soon as you said that, I'm like, wait a minute, I already paid for Chapter 1. So, yeah, the idea of him scoring the Noah Hawley movie really excites me, and it makes me more excited for the prospect of it, and it's definitely going to be able to tie in to the Star Trek universe at large with Jeff Russo.
All right. Well, we've talked about the facts, and now let's speculate on what's going to happen in the future of Star Trek.
You make some very good points, Captain. But it's still all speculation and theory.
So each week, I and my guests give you a wish or theory we're nurturing about Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, future of the franchise. So Heather, let's hear your theory or wish for this week.
Well, I usually like to come to you with big theories, but I'm not going to do that today. I just have a small little wish, and that is when we have more short treks in the future, because I'm sure we will. Short treks have been a proven commodity that people enjoy them, and they enjoy getting these little stories. I would love to see a short trek that features the history between Seven of Nine and Hugh.
Okay, tell me more.
It's probably one of the biggest moments of Picard that I walked away going, I wish we knew more about their relationship, because we've never seen the two of them interact on screen. And when Seven came to Eleanor's rescue on the Borg artifact, when he was hiding in Hugh's office, and her first question is, where is Hugh? So she's obviously met Hugh before. She's obviously had a relationship with him enough to make her as angry at Narissa as Eleanor was for killing him. So I would just love to see something lovely and friendly about Seven and Hugh and their prior relationship that we had never seen on screen before. I just think it would be fun, and it would just add a lot more context.
I would enjoy seeing that a lot. I really liked Jonathan Del Arco's reprisal of Hugh. The character had never really resonated with me all that much during his appearances on The Next Generation, but very much did during Picard. I thought Jonathan did an excellent job of it. And yeah, that was one area that they did not do a great job of exploring, was some of these connections and relationships between characters that ultimately were implied or inferred, but not actually demonstrated. It seems like they chose to preference Picard and Hugh and Picard and Seven, which I guess makes sense. It's Star Trek Picard, over Seven and Hugh to sort of round out that triangle of relationships. But it does feel like a missing piece. And so, yeah, a short trek would be great, because that would allow us to get Jonathan Del Arco back in the costume for at least one more time, given that the character is now deceased. Or a novel would be cool too, that would go into detail about the history of those two characters and the things that have happened to them in the decades since Voyager returned and they would have met each other. Yeah, I think that's a great wish. I'd love that too. So my theory or wish this week isn't actually either. It's an opinion. And it's kind of a bummer, because I hate that I'm saying this, but I do not think that Star Trek Las Vegas should happen this year. I think I'd said on previous episodes when we were talking about STLV and the announcement that Kelsey Grammer was going to be there this year, the end of July is a long way away. There's a lot that can happen between now and then in regards to this pandemic. Maybe sort of life will have returned to normal by then, and we will all feel good and comfortable with going to Las Vegas in order to do this convention. But I now feel like we're sort of all kidding ourselves that we're going to be in a position to all get back together as this giant group of people so quickly. I mean, that's not to say that by the end of July, we will still be hunkered down in our homes and only going out to the grocery store or to work that we need to do, or, for exercise and nothing else. But I don't know that we're going to be going to conventions by August. And I don't know that it is helpful for us to labor under the assumption that 3,000 people are all going to hop on planes in 3 months and head to Vegas for STLV. I think creation, and same with San Diego Comic-Con, right? Like that's 25,000 people. I mean, it doesn't sound like a good idea for that many people to be congregating together so quickly, given that we know that this is going to play out at least into June, maybe July, and lots of people are talking about longer than that. This sucks a lot. This was going to be my 10th STLV in a row. I first started going in 2011, and it will hurt a lot not to go this year. But it does seem like we do need to recognize the severity of the situation we are in and be respectful of that, so that there can be an STLV 2021. It seems like the quicker we get everything under control now, and the more seriously we take this now, the less problems we're setting ourselves up for in the long term. And even though I had previously been on the side of saying, oh, we'll wait and see, we'll see what happens, I now think that it probably makes sense for them either to push STLV later into the year or cancel it, which is, as I say, a massive bummer, but I think the right choice. Heather, how do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I was hoping to make this actually my first STLV because ironically the dates for the convention fall on actually both yours and my birthday.
They do.
But I agree with you to a point. I think even if the convention does decide to go forward, it's not going to be the same as it has been in years. There's still going to have to be precautions put in place, not just for the safety of the fans attending, but also the multitude of actors who will be there and interacting with strangers on a regular basis. One of the things, and we're ironically going to be talking about this when I record the episode of my podcast in a couple hours. But one of the things my co-host mentioned was the idea of a virtual con. And some conventions are moving in that direction and literally hosting virtual conventions where they have actors come on and you can pay to do Q&As with them. And some of them do like green screen. I'm not even sure how it works. I'm not that technically minded, like green screen photo ops. So it looks like you're taking a picture next to the person, but you're not actually doing that. I honestly think if they wanted to host STLV this year, it should be something online like that, just for the safety of everyone involved. Because as much as there would be people willing to go and participate in it, there's not going to be as many. I think there's going to be plenty of people who are still cautious and want to stay at home. And that would be a way to get everyone involved and still kind of have some semblance of a convention.
We've been figuring it out in our daily lives, so it does feel like, they could maybe come up with something. And I certainly, think the Star Trek actor community, most of them are in the high-risk age categories for this virus. So it doesn't seem like makes a ton of sense to put them in front of 3,000 people who, as far as we know, could still potentially be passing this thing around only 3 short months from now. So we'll see. I think we should all start preparing ourselves for the idea that it will not happen in August as planned, and that either it will be postponed or cancelled this year entirely, in which case we will all look forward to getting back together in 1 year and 3 months from now instead. Do you have a theory or a wish for Discovery, Picard, or the future of the franchise that you'd like to share? Tweet them to me at WeeklyTrek, and I might feature your theory in a future episode. Well, that's all the time we've got for this episode of Weekly Trek. Thank you so much to my guest, Heather Kirby, for joining me today. Heather, how can people contact you if they want to continue the conversation?
You can primarily continue the conversation on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @nerdygal33, and my Twitter name is Never Apologize for Being Nerdy. And you can also find the Twitter handle of my podcast, the Promenade Merchants podcast. It is @PromTrekPod. And like I said, we are recording our 3rd episode in a few hours after I get done with you, Alex. So look forward to that.
So it is a podcast kind of day, huh?
It is.
And you can find this show on Twitter @WeeklyTrek and me @Alexander T. Perry. And if you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. And please check out some of the other great shows on the Tricorder Transmissions. And if you enjoy our shows, please also consider becoming a Patreon of Tricorder, which you can find at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. And lastly, if you're looking for Star Trek news on the internet, I hope you will turn to trekcore.com. Well, thank you, Heather. Thank you to all of my listeners. And until next week, live long and prosper.